I still remember the way he looked at me that day, not the glance of a husband or a partner or someone who once loved me. No, it was the look of someone who had already decided I was nothing worthless, incapable, undeserving. The words came out slowly, deliberately, like a judge delivering a verdict I hadn't even imagined. "You don't deserve a nice life," he said. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about love, marriage, and security shattered around me. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to tell him he was wrong, but something inside me froze. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the tiny, familiar voice I had been trying to ignore for years, the one that told me I wasn't enough. He had always found ways to remind me of my place, whether it was sneering at my career, mocking my dreams, or dismissing my efforts to contribute financially. But hearing it like this aloud, with such cold finality, it hurt in a way that went deeper than words. I had spent years building my life around him. My happiness, my routines, my sense of security, they were all carefully aligned with what I thought he wanted, with what I thought a good wife should do. I cooked his favorite meals even when I didn't feel like it. I worked overtime to cover bills he pretended to forget existed. I smiled when he returned late, listened patiently to his complaints, and never questioned his decisions even when they were clearly selfish. I thought loyalty was love. I thought patience would earn me respect. But that day, I realized I had been wrong. All those years of giving, bending, sacrificing, they hadn't earned me respect. They hadn't earned me love. They hadn't earned me a life that mattered to me. In his eyes, I was replaceable, disposable, insignificant. I remember standing there, my hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wanted to cry. I wanted to beg him to reconsider. But another voice emerged, a small, quiet voice, one I had almost forgotten. It whispered, "If he doesn't see your worth, show him your strength." At first, I dismissed it. How could I? I had spent my entire adult life thinking my power lay in keeping him happy. But as I looked at him, smug and self-assured, I began to notice something else. Fear. Not his fear, but mine. Fear of leaving, fear of starting over, fear of failing. And then, somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited, a stubborn, desperate, defiant spark that said, "No, I will not let this be my life." That night, after he went to sleep, I sat alone in the dark living room, staring at the ceiling. I thought about everything he had taken from me, not possessions, not money, not opportunities, but my confidence, my voice, my dreams. He had convinced me that I was small, incapable, unworthy of happiness. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that his definition of deserving was meaningless. What mattered was my own. What mattered was my decision to reclaim my life, even if he never understood it. I didn't know how I would do it. I didn't know where to start. But I made a silent promise to myself that night. I would build a life so full, so vibrant, and so independent that he could never touch it. Not with anger, not with manipulation, not with control. I would prove, first to myself and then to the world, that my worth was never determined by his approval. The next morning, I went about my routine, but something had changed. I smiled when he ignored me. I nodded when he criticized me, but inside, I was planning. Every bill I paid, every decision I made, every late night at work, I started seeing it as a brick in the foundation of my future. And even though I had no idea what that future looked like yet, for the first time in years, I felt free. Looking back, I realize now that his cruelty was the gift I never asked for. It woke me up. It reminded me that my life was mine to live, not his to control. And as terrifying as it was to imagine leaving everything I knew behind, I also felt an exhilarating thrill. The possibility of becoming someone he could never break, someone he could never ignore, someone he could never control. I knew the road ahead would be long. I knew there would be setbacks, doubts, and moments where I would feel weak. But for the first time, I wasn't living for him. I was living for me. And that made all the difference. After that day, I began noticing the ways he had kept me small for years. It wasn't always in obvious gestures or cruel words. Often, it was subtle, almost invisible, unless you paid attention. The way he controlled money, claiming he was saving for us, but secretly deciding what I could or couldn't spend. The way he belittled my ideas, making me second-guess myself. The way he measured my worth by how much I served him, not by who I was. I had always thought I was lucky to have a husband. I had convinced myself that his anger, his sharp words, his criticism were just parts of love quirks I had to tolerate. But now I saw them for what they truly were. Chains. Chains he had wrapped around my confidence, my dreams, my voice. And the worst part? I had helped him do it. Every time I apologized for speaking up. Every time I hid my frustration. Every time I accepted less than I deserved. It was frightening to admit it, but I knew deep down I had two choices: continue living as I had been, small, invisible, unfulfilled, or risk everything to reclaim my life. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't have to confront him directly. I didn't need permission to take control. I could start quietly, slowly, secretly. The first step was finances. For years, he had managed every dollar, monitoring my spending, deciding what was necessary and what was indulgent. But I had income of my own. I had savings tucked away in accounts he didn't know existed. And slowly, deliberately, I started moving pieces. Small amounts at first, nothing that would raise suspicion. But each transaction felt like a small act of rebellion, a whisper to myself, I am taking back control. I also began documenting everything, every harsh word, every instance of manipulation, every lie he told about me, or to me. At first, it felt obsessive, maybe even paranoid. But as the days went on, I realized it was my lifeline, proof that I wasn't imagining things, proof that my feelings were valid, proof that one day, if needed, I could show the world and maybe even him that I was not the problem. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into my career with a new determination. Every late night, every extra project, every networking opportunity wasn't just about earning money, it was about building something that was mine, untouchable. It gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years, a reminder that I was capable of more than he had ever allowed me to believe. Yet, even as I planned quietly, he remained oblivious. Or maybe he wanted to remain oblivious. It was easier for him if I stayed small. But I began to notice cracks in his confidence too. He assumed I was still dependent, still timid, and that assumption became my greatest weapon. Every small victory I achieved, every decision I made independently, I savored silently. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, heart pounding, replaying arguments and imagining confrontations. Sometimes fear would grip me, the fear of leaving, the fear of failing, the fear of what he might do if he discovered my plans. But then another feeling would surge: resolve. He might have believed I didn't deserve a nice life, but I was determined to create one, a life he could never step into. A life he would realize too late belonged to someone stronger than he ever imagined. I began to dream again. Not the dreams I had suppressed to fit his expectations, but my own. Traveling, owning a home that was truly mine, building friendships and connections without judgment, feeling proud of myself not because he approved, but because I had earned it. and for the first time in years, I felt hope. Real hope. Even in the smallest moments, I could feel the shift. I would shop for things I wanted, secretly saving for my future. I would research investments, career moves, opportunities for growth. I would read, learn, and plan. And each day I grew a little stronger, a little braver, a little closer to the woman I had been before I let him convince me that I wasn't enough. I started imagining the day I could finally confront him, not with anger, not with revenge, but with the quiet power of someone who had taken control of her own destiny. A life that was beautiful, independent, fulfilling. A life he could never enter because it was no longer his to control. That vision became my fuel. And with every passing day, I realized that his words, once crushing, had become the spark that lit my fire. "You don't deserve a nice life," he had said. But I was learning, slowly, deliberately, that I did deserve it. And I would have it on my terms, my way. It didn't take long for him to notice a change in me. Not the kind of change that anyone else could see. No, I was still smiling, still keeping up appearances, but a subtle shift in my energy, my confidence, my presence. And that shift scared him, because he had spent years teaching me to doubt myself, teaching me to shrink, teaching me that I was nothing without him. And now, without realizing it, I had begun to grow beyond the cage he had built. He started testing me, as he always did when someone dared step out of line. At first, it was small things, an offhand comment about my work, a sarcastic remark about my appearance, a casual threat hidden in a joke. "I hope you don't get too comfortable with those ideas of independence," he said one evening, swirling his wine like it was poison. I forced a smile, but inside, my blood boiled. He wanted me to cower. He wanted me to apologize. But I didn't. Not anymore. Instead, I began documenting these moments, keeping a careful record in a notebook hidden under my bed. Each insult, each attempt at control, each lie, it all became evidence. Evidence not just for the world, but for myself. Proof that I had not been weak, that I had not been overreacting, that I had not been imagining the pain he caused. I began to see a pattern, a strategy he had been using for years to manipulate me, and for the first time, it no longer had power over me. At work, I flourished in ways he could never imagine. I stayed late, took on challenging projects, networked tirelessly, and learned every skill I could. I was no longer the timid wife who deferred to his judgment. I was growing into a woman capable of standing on her own 2 feet. And secretly, that knowledge thrilled me. Every email sent without his knowledge, every promotion quietly earned, every small victory, it felt like I was building a fortress around my soul. But he noticed the change too. And that when the emotional games began in earnest. He would criticize me subtly in front of others, laugh at my ideas, question my decisions. He hoped to undermine my confidence, to remind me that no matter how much I tried, I was still less than in his eyes. And yet, each time he tried, I felt something unexpected. A calm, growing strength. A realization that his words only had the power I allowed them to have. There were nights I cried silently in the bathroom, exhausted from holding in my anger and frustration, terrified of the confrontation I knew was coming. But even in those moments, I felt the tiniest flicker of pride. I was no longer the person who let fear define me. I was learning to turn pain into strategy, manipulation into motivation, and cruelty into clarity. One evening, he cornered me in the kitchen, voice low but sharp. "You think you are clever, don't you? Trying to play your little games?" His eyes searched mine for fear. I met his gaze evenly, heart pounding, but my voice steady. "I am not playing games. I am living my life." For a moment, I thought he would explode, but instead, He walked away, muttering under his breath. And I realized something profound. I had won, in that moment. Not in money, not in confrontation, not in revenge, but in the quiet, terrifying act of defiance. I had taken my first real step toward freedom. From that point on, my actions became bolder. I invested more of my savings, researched new opportunities, and planned my escape from the life he had tried to cage me in. Each step was calculated, each move deliberate. I wasn't just surviving, I was strategizing. And with each strategy, I felt the power of my own independence grow, like a pulse inside me I could no longer ignore. I also began to notice how his control had left cracks in our household. Friends and family who had always been careful not to upset him began to see me differently. They noticed my growing confidence, my sharp mind, my quiet determination. I realized that reclaiming my life wasn't just about leaving him, it was about rediscovering myself, about showing the world the woman I had always been, but had been taught to hide. The nights were still hard, filled with doubt and fear, but they were no longer paralyzing. Each time I felt afraid, I reminded myself of one truth. He did not define my worth. He never had. And the day I finally stepped fully into my life, I would do it not to hurt him, not to prove him wrong, but to honor myself. And deep down, I knew that day was coming sooner than he imagined. By the time I reached this point, I had learned to mask my intentions with a calm exterior. He still believed I was the obedient, quiet wife who would never challenge him, never defy him, never step out of line. And that false confidence he had in me became my greatest advantage. Because while he was busy underestimating me, I was preparing the first move that would begin to shift the balance of power in my life. It started with something simple, something almost invisible to anyone watching. I decided to reclaim my evenings. For years, I had been at his beck and call, cooking, cleaning, managing his needs, and suppressing my own. But one night, I told him I was going out with a colleague to discuss a work project. He scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Don't waste your time. You will just make a fool of yourself," he said. I smiled politely, nodded, and left. That night, I didn't just meet my colleague, I met with a financial advisor I had been secretly researching for months. I had begun saving, investing, and planning in silence, and this meeting was the first step toward turning those quiet efforts into real power. I felt my heart racing, but not with fear, with excitement, with the knowledge that for the first time in years I was making a choice entirely for myself, without him, without approval, without guilt. Over the next few weeks, I quietly implemented changes. I opened new accounts, diversified investments, and even took steps toward starting a small business I had dreamed about but always shelved because we couldn't afford it or it wasn't too practical. Each step was deliberate, measured, and, most importantly, hidden from him. I had learned long ago that he would never let me have anything that was mine if he knew about it. And then, the first confrontation happened. He discovered a small discrepancy in the household finances, an extra withdrawal he didn't recognize. Immediately, he assumed the worst: theft, deception, betrayal. He stormed into the room, voice rising, accusing me of lying, of hiding, of undermining him. But instead of panicking, instead of cowering like I would have in the past, I stayed calm. I explained everything clearly, rationally, with evidence in hand, showing him that my actions were legal, responsible, and smart. I saw the shock in his eyes. He had never expected me to be capable of reasoning like this. He had never imagined that I could act independently, that I could plan, that I could think strategically. And in that moment, I felt a thrill I had never known. Power. Real, tangible power. The first real shift in control since our marriage began. It wasn't just financial. Slowly, I started asserting myself in other areas too. I declined requests that felt unfair. I spoke up during arguments. I refused to apologize for things that weren't my fault. And each time I felt him retreat a little, realizing that the quiet, obedient woman he thought he knew was no longer there. Evenings became mine again. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, indulged in hobbies I had abandoned, and allowed myself the freedom to dream again. I began traveling short distances alone, something I had never done without his input, and the feeling of independence was intoxicating. He watched, often in silence, sometimes with suspicion, but I no longer needed his approval to validate my choices. Of course, he tried to push back. He criticized, belittled, and even threatened at times. But by then, I had a shield. Knowledge of my worth, confidence in my actions, and a clear vision of the life I was building. Every attempt he made to control me only reminded me of why I had started this journey in the first place. And the most important part? I realized that the first bold step the first night I went to that meeting with the financial advisor was the key. It had started a chain reaction. Every small act of independence, every moment I chose myself over him, began to erode the foundation of control he had built over me. And that realization filled me with a sense of triumph I had never experienced before. That night, as I lay in bed, I no longer felt fear or doubt. I felt determination. I felt possibility. I felt the exhilarating truth that the life he said I didn't deserve was not only within my reach, it was mine to claim. And one day, I knew he would look at me and realize that the woman he had tried to control, belittle, and destroy had become someone he could never enter, never influence, and never break. He didn't take my quiet rebellion lightly. I could feel the shift in his demeanor almost immediately after my first bold move. The subtle manipulations and teasing remarks turned into pointed critiques and cold silences. He tried to assert control in ways he never had before, testing the limits of my newfound independence. But this time, I was ready. It started with the mornings. He would comment on the way I dressed, the way I spent my time, the meals I cooked or didn't cook. "You think you can live like this? You think you're clever?" he would say, sneering. But instead of shrinking, instead of bending like I once did, I held my ground. I listened. I nodded. But I did what I wanted. I made my own choices. I refused to let his words dictate my day. At first, it was terrifying. The tension in the house was palpable. Every glance he threw my way felt like a challenge. I could sense his frustration growing, and part of me feared that he might escalate further. But the fear that had once paralyzed me was now tempered with resolve. I had a plan, and I wasn't about to abandon it because of his anger. He tried financial intimidation next. He would question every purchase, every withdrawal, every investment. He assumed that my confidence in handling money was fragile, that he could make me doubt myself. But I had built a small fortress of knowledge and preparation. Every transaction was documented, every investment legal and accounted for. I could see the disbelief in his eyes as he realized I was not only capable, but also smarter than he had ever given me credit for. Then came the emotional games, the guilt, the subtle threats, the attempts to make me feel responsible for his unhappiness. "If you leave me like this, you'll regret it," he warned one evening. I had heard these words countless times before. They were designed to trap me, to make me feel that my life depended on his approval. But I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but clarity. I realized I owed him nothing. I owed myself everything. Even when he tried to isolate me from friends and family, I had anticipated it. I had quietly reconnected with old friends, started making new connections, and built a support network he couldn't control. Each conversation, each gathering, was a reminder that my world was expanding, while his influence was shrinking. And the more he tried to pull me back, the stronger my resolve became. One night, he cornered me in the living room, voice trembling with anger and frustration. "You think you are independent? You think you can escape me?" he demanded, eyes flashing. I looked at him calmly, my voice steady. "I am not escaping," I said. "I am living, something you'll never understand." For a moment he seemed stunned. Maybe he had never expected me to stand so firm, to speak with such certainty. And in that moment, I felt a rush of empowerment unlike anything I had known before. I realized that he could throw threats, manipulations, and criticisms at me, but they no longer had power over my choices, my confidence, or my future. That night, I went to bed with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. He would continue to test me, of course. He would continue to try to control, intimidate, and belittle. But I had already won in ways he couldn't see. Every act of resistance, every step toward independence, was a victory he could not take from me. And I knew that with each passing day, my life was becoming more mine and less his. It was no longer about proving him wrong, it was about proving myself right. About reclaiming a life that had been stolen, a life I deserved, a life he could never enter. By this point, I had learned to navigate his storms with a calm I never knew I possessed. Every manipulation, every critique, every attempt to control me only fueled my determination. I had tasted freedom in small doses, but I knew that if I wanted a life he could never touch, I needed a bold move, something irreversible, undeniable, something that would finally place the power entirely in my hands. It began with a plan I had been developing quietly for months. Every meeting with my financial advisor, every late-night research session, every small investment was a piece of the puzzle. I had accumulated enough knowledge, resources, and confidence to step into a life completely on my terms. But I needed to be careful. This wasn't about revenge, it was about independence, and it had to be executed flawlessly. One morning, while he was busy with work, I made the decision. I drafted my first official step toward leaving legally, financially, emotionally. I finalized a separate bank account, transferred my savings, and even consulted with a lawyer to understand my rights. Each document I signed, each number I transferred, felt like a declaration of war, not against him, but against the version of myself that had allowed him to diminish me for so long. He didn't notice, of course. That was the beauty of preparation. He assumed I was still compliant, still dependent, still the same woman he had spent years trying to mold. And as he continued with his life, oblivious to the changes unfolding in mine, I began to see a new world, a life where I was the architect of my destiny, not a prisoner of his whims. The first time I told him no without fear, I felt an unfamiliar thrill. He had asked me to cancel a personal engagement, assuming I would obey, but I didn't. I smiled politely, explained my plans calmly, and left. The shock in his eyes was almost comical. He had never encountered resistance like this before, and I savored the quiet power in that moment. Over the next few weeks, I accelerated my independence. I signed the papers for a small business I had been dreaming of for years, a boutique, a place where my creativity could flourish and my identity could shine. I enrolled in online courses to strengthen my skills. I met with mentors who inspired me, and slowly, methodically, I built a life around me, not him. Of course, he tried to regain control. He questioned every step, criticized every decision, and even tried to guilt me into compliance. But I had become a master of detachment. I responded with calm reasoning, facts, and quiet confidence. Every failed attempt he made only reinforced my resolve. I realized that independence wasn't just a choice. It was a shield, a source of power, and the path to reclaiming my dignity. One evening, I looked around my home, the space that had once felt like a cage. I saw the subtle transformations I had made, the small victories I had claimed. For the first time, I felt the life I had longed for, one where I could wake up without fear, speak without trembling, and plan without permission. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The bold move, the financial independence, the legal preparation, the emotional liberation had set me free in ways he could never understand. He had tried to define my worth, to limit my potential, and to control my life. But I had taken back everything he had tried to steal. And the most incredible part? I had done it quietly, strategically, with my dignity intact. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a peace I hadn't known for years. I realized something profound. Freedom wasn't about leaving him alone, nor was it about proving him wrong. Freedom was about reclaiming myself, standing tall, and building a life so full, so complete, that he could never enter it, not through manipulation, not through anger, not through control. For the first time, I truly understood the meaning of my own worth, and I knew that the life I was creating, beautiful, independent, and untouchable, was mine forever. The more I grew into my independence, the more I noticed the cracks in his control. He had spent years believing that I could be manipulated, that my happiness depended on his approval. But that illusion was fading, and I was about to show him, in a way he could never ignore, that the life I was building was untouchable. It started with small displays of my independence. I took trips on my own, attended networking events, and hosted gatherings for friends who had been long neglected. Each act was a statement. I was no longer bound by his rules, no longer defined by his expectations. And though he watched, often in disbelief, he could do nothing to stop me. At work, I excelled. Projects that I had once been hesitant to take on now became my playground. I negotiated deals, earned promotions, and began saving for bigger ventures. Every success, every new opportunity, was a brick in the foundation of my life, the life he had told me I didn't deserve. And every time he tried to dismiss it, I smiled inside, knowing that his disbelief was proof of my power. One evening, I decided it was time for a more direct demonstration. I invited close friends and family over for a small celebration, a milestone I had achieved in my business. When he saw the joy, the laughter, the admiration in the room, I saw something I had never seen in him before: awe, confusion, and maybe, just maybe, regret. He had believed he could control everything, but here was a life full of love, respect, and success built without him, thriving without his input. He tried, of course. Subtle comments, attempts to belittle, questions meant to undermine my confidence. But by then, I had learned the art of calm detachment. His words bounced off me like raindrops on glass. I no longer needed his approval, his validation, or his permission. The power I had quietly built over months now shone in every action, every smile, every achievement. The best part? I didn't flaunt my independence out of spite. I didn't need to humiliate him or make him feel small. I simply lived. I thrived. I celebrated myself and my life in ways he could never intrude upon. And in doing so, I discovered a truth I had long forgotten. Freedom is not about the absence of control. It is about the presence of self. He started to notice more overtly then. Subtle attempts to criticize became sharp jabs, thinly veiled threats. "You think you are better than me now," he said one night, voice low but tense. I looked at him, calm and steady, and replied, "I am better than the version of me who let you control my life. That's all." That silence that followed was profound. He realized that I had changed. I was no longer the timid woman who waited for his approval. I was someone who had built a life so full, so complete, that he could never touch it. And for the first time, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not revenge, not malice, but deep, unshakable self-respect. By this point, I had begun dreaming bigger. Investments, business expansion, personal growth, all of it was now within my control. I was no longer living cautiously, I was living expansively, boldly, and unapologetically. And every step reminded me that he had underestimated the strength he had once tried to suppress. I began to understand something even deeper. This wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right. About showing myself that no one, not even someone who claimed to love me, had the right to define my worth. And the life I had built, a life filled with confidence, independence, and joy, was a testament to that truth. And as I lay in bed that night, reflecting on the journey so far, I realized something profound. The life he said I didn't deserve was not just a dream anymore. It was real. It was mine. And he could never enter it, not through anger, not through manipulation, not through fear. Because I had finally claimed it, fully, completely, and with a strength that no one could ever take away. By the time Chapter 8 of my life unfolded, I had grown in ways he could never have anticipated. Months of careful planning, relentless work, and quiet resilience had transformed me. I wasn't just independent, I was untouchable. And it was time he realized it. It began with a simple decision. I would confront him. Not with anger, not with yelling, not with vengeance, but with the undeniable proof of everything I had built. The life he had told me I didn't deserve would stand before him, fully formed, thriving, and beautiful. And he would have no power over it. I invited him to my small celebration, the unveiling of my boutique, a project I had poured my heart, soul, and savings into. He arrived naturally, expecting the old me, expecting to find a timid, obedient wife who still needed his guidance, his control, his permission. But instead, he was greeted by something entirely different. A confident, radiant woman whose life was not just surviving, it was flourishing. I watched his expression closely. Shock, disbelief, and even a hint of fear crossed his face. He realized, probably for the first time, that the rules had changed. The woman he thought he could manipulate, the woman he had dismissed, underestimated, and belittled, was no longer bound by his control. She had become a force entirely her own. As I walked him through the boutique, I calmly explained my role in every decision, every investment, every detail. Each word was deliberate, clear, and controlled. He tried to interject, tried to make comments that would undermine me, but I met each one with calm reasoning. I could see his frustration growing, the panic in his eyes as he realized he could no longer dominate or intimidate me. How did you do all this?" he finally asked, voice trembling slightly. Not with admiration, not with pride, but with confusion and disbelief. And in that moment, I smiled. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but quietly, deeply, powerfully. "I did what I always should have done," I said. "I believed in myself. I worked for what I deserved. I built a life that no one, not even you, could control." I could see him struggling internally, as if the ground beneath him had shifted and he had no footing. For years, he had believed he held all the cards, all the power. But now, he was faced with a reality he could not manipulate. I was free. My confidence, my success, my happiness, all of it was real, tangible, and untouchable. The room was silent for a moment. Then he tried one last tactic: guilt. "You've changed," he said, voice low. "You're not the woman I married." I looked at him, steady, unwavering. "No," I said softly. "I am not." because I am finally the woman I was always meant to be. And if you had supported me, I could have been even stronger with you. But I don't need you anymore." He said nothing after that. I could see it in his eyes: regret, maybe even shame, but also understanding. He finally realized the truth. He could no longer enter my life in the same way. The life he had tried to control, limit, and define was now mine, fully mine, and he had no claim over it. After that day, I noticed a remarkable change in myself. The fear that had once held me captive was gone. The anxiety, the self-doubt, the need for validation, it all disappeared. I had faced him, shown him my strength, and stepped into a life that was untouchable. And for the first time, I felt a serenity I had never known. I also realized something even more profound. This confrontation wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right, about reclaiming the dignity, the respect, and the life I had been denied, about finally living fully and unapologetically. And that realization, more than anything, felt like victory. After the confrontation, something inside me shifted permanently. The tension, the fear, the constant feeling of walking on eggshells, it all dissolved. I had shown him, shown myself, that the life he had told me I didn't deserve was not only possible, it was real, thriving, and untouchable. And in that realization, I found freedom like I had never known. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity and calm. No lingering doubts, no questions about my worth, no fear of manipulation. I moved through my day with purpose, knowing that every choice I made now was mine alone. I no longer needed to hide, to explain, to seek approval. I was fully, completely, unapologetically me. I took deliberate steps to solidify my independence. Financially, I continued to invest in my boutique and other ventures, building security and stability that he could not affect. Emotionally, I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up, who respected me, and who celebrated my victories rather than diminishing them. Every connection I nurtured became a testament to the life I was now creating on my own terms. He tried to engage with me occasionally, as if nothing had changed, but I responded with the calm detachment that had become my armor. I could see the frustration in his eyes when he realized that no amount of anger, guilt-tripping, or criticism could touch me anymore. And I felt no triumph in watching him struggle, only relief that I had finally stepped fully into my own power. The most incredible part of this transformation was how I began to see myself. I wasn't just the woman who had endured years of manipulation and belittlement. I was a woman who had reclaimed her life, who had built a future despite every obstacle, who had transformed fear into strength and doubt into action. And that self-recognition was more satisfying than any revenge or validation I could have sought from him. Over time, I embraced the joy that had once seemed impossible. I traveled to places I had only dreamed of, pursued passions that had been shelved for years, and invested in experiences that enriched my soul. I reveled in the freedom of choice, the thrill of independence, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that my life was entirely, beautifully mine. And while he was no longer the center of my world, I realized something profound. The pain he caused, the control he exerted, and the words he spoke all became catalysts for my growth. They were the very fire that forged my strength, the very obstacles that propelled me to rise above. In a strange, liberating way, I owed him for inadvertently teaching me what it meant to fight for my own life. I finally understood the truth that had eluded me for so long. No one can define your worth except yourself. No one can dictate the life you deserve except you. And when you summon the courage to reclaim it, to build it piece by piece, to live fully and unapologetically, you discover a power that is untouchable, unshakable, and eternal. Looking back, I realized that everything had led me to this moment. The years of self-doubt, the manipulation, the belittlement, and the quiet suffering, they were all part of the journey that brought me here. And here, in this life I had created, I found peace, fulfillment, and unshakable confidence. He said I didn't deserve a nice life. I smiled because now I knew the truth. I not only deserved it, I had built one he could never enter, a life that belonged entirely to me, and a strength that no one could ever take away. The journey that began in fear, doubt, and quiet suffering had led me to a place I once thought was impossible. A place of freedom, strength, and undeniable self-worth. Standing here today, I can look back and see the path clearly: the manipulation, the belittlement, the anger, the lies. All of it shaped me, refined me, and ultimately empowered me to claim the life I deserved. I had finally realized that the life he said I didn't deserve wasn't a gift anyone could give me. It wasn't a approval he could bestow or praise he could offer. It was something I had to fight for, build for, and claim as my own. And every step along that path, the sleepless nights, the silent tears, the careful planning, the bold moves, was worth it. Today, my boutique thrives, my career flourishes, and my relationships are built on mutual respect and love. I wake up each morning knowing that my happiness, my choices, and my future are mine alone. No one can take them from me. No one can belittle me, manipulate me, or define my worth again. And it's in that certainty that Ivy discovered the deepest joy: freedom. Looking back, I realized something else. The people who try to control us, to belittle us, to make us doubt our worth, they can never take away our power unless we allow it. The moment we step into ourselves, the moment we claim our choices and honor our desires, we become untouchable. That was the most important lesson this journey taught me. No one can determine the life you deserve, but you. I also learned the value of patience, strategy, and resilience. Freedom isn't instantaneous, it's built slowly, piece by piece, often in secret, often while enduring doubt and fear. But each small step compounds into something monumental. Each decision to prioritize yourself, to stand firm, and to act with integrity builds a life so full and vibrant that no one can undermine it. And perhaps the most powerful lesson of all: strength does not come from revenge, anger, or proving someone wrong. True strength comes from reclaiming yourself, from nurturing your dreams, and from building a life that honors who you are. My happiness is not a reflection of his failure. It is a testament to my perseverance, my courage, and my unwavering belief in myself. As I stand here today, I feel a profound sense of peace. The fear that once defined me, the doubt that once imprisoned me, the need for validation that once consumed me, all of it is gone. I am free. I am powerful. I am enough. He said I didn't deserve a nice life, but I built one anyway, one filled with love, creativity, independence, and joy. One that he could never enter, one that no one could ever take away. And in building it, I discovered something far more valuable than wealth or success. I discovered myself. So, to anyone listening, anyone who feels trapped, belittled, or undervalued, know this: your life is yours to claim. Your worth is not defined by anyone else. Take each step, no matter how small, to build the life you deserve. And one day, you will stand where I stand today: free, strong, fulfilled, and untouchable. Because in the end, the life we deserve is not given, it is built. And once built, it belongs to no one but you.